Finally, let's discuss the Roosevelt Corollary and the period that historians have dubbed the Age of Dollar Diplomacy, which lasted from 1898 to roughly 1930. So, dollar diplomacy refers to the United States using its economic power to influence nations in Latin America. And after the Spanish-American War of 1898, U.S. policy was fashioned to furnish trade with the region and to keep an open door to foreign markets. The U.S. wanted to ensure it had markets abroad to export its manufactured and agricultural goods, and it believed that no country had the right to cut off trade with the United States. And there was a fear in the U.S. at the time that if industry could not export its products, then workers would be laid off, unemployment would rise, and that would lead to social unrest. So this is kind of the logic behind the U.S. wanting access to foreign markets. And the Roosevelt Corollary comes in 1904 after the Spanish-American War, and it was named after President Theodore Roosevelt, who had been an American hero of the Spanish-American War. And it's a corollary, so it's an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. It's like updating the Monroe Doctrine. And it stated, the Roosevelt Corollary, that the U.S. would use its power to collect Latin American debts owed to European countries, and that the U.S. would act as an international police power. So you see, Britain and France frequently intervened in Latin American affairs during this time, and they did so to collect debts. And the United States was uncomfortable with this, with Britain and France sending its gunboats into the Caribbean to collect debts. And the Roosevelt Corollary also said that the U.S. had a right to use its military force to keep Britain and France out of the Americas, because the United States wanted to become the source of loans for Latin American countries during these years. And this policy is also known as the Big Stick Policy, or gunboat diplomacy. And you can kind of see this political cartoon on the slide here that demonstrates the U.S. being the leader of the Caribbean and becoming a source of loans for Caribbean countries. And gunboat diplomacy refers to the pursuit of foreign policy objectives with the aid and display of naval power. U.S. gunboats would often appear in Latin American harbors, and of course this constitutes a direct threat of warfare. And aside from military conquests, gunboat diplomacy was the dominant way to establish new trading partners during this period. And the U.S. moved to implement this policy by taking control of custom houses of different countries. And I think this will become a little bit clearer, this policy, particularly when we read about the Dominican Republic. In the Dominican Republic Reader this week, because there's some really good readings that really demonstrate how the U.S. would take control of the ports in order to collect debts, because that's where a lot of the trade and taxes were accumulated. And between 1898 and 1933, there were over 30 U.S. interventions in Latin America, and the vast majority of these occurred in the Caribbean and in Central America. For example, we'll read about the U.S. occupation of the Dominican Republic from 1916 to 1933. Also, the American Marines intervened in Nicaragua from 1924 to 1933, and they were there fighting Augusto Sandino's rebel forces in Nicaragua. And these interventions, of course, created resentment among Latin Americans, and often there were fights between locals and American troops in the streets of Latin American cities. And everywhere the U.S. intervened, it established a National Guard. And these National Guards served as the Army and police forces, and their commanders were appointed by the United States. And so these forces were dependent on the United States for arms and supplies. And these National Guards are also significant because some of the most infamous dictators, such as Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic and Anastasio Somoza in Nicaragua, they began their careers in the National Guard, and they would go on to be dictators in these countries. And we'll read a lot about Rafael Trujillo after the midterm exam. He was a dictator in the Dominican Republic. Finally, let's have a look at Panamanian independence. And the U.S. played a crucial role in the independence of Panama. And at the time, Panama was part of Colombia. And what happens is in 1903, there was a revolt of some elites in Panama. They revolted against Colombia, and it was a very small group. And the U.S. supported these rebels in Panama because the U.S. was interested in building a canal across the Isthmus of Central America, and Panama was the most ideal place to build the canal. So when these elites revolt in Panama against Colombia in 1903, the U.S. sends gunboats to support the Panamanian rebels. And there was really little Colombia could do to take back Panama in the face of superior U.S. military forces. The U.S. would not allow Colombian troops to pass into Panama to crush the rebellion. And again, the Panama Canal is very significant because they're going to build this after Panamanian independence, and it's going to connect the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, and it's dramatically going to reduce travel time across the Americas. And also the Panama Canal is going to be a very strategic location for world trade. And Panama gives the U.S. exclusive rights to control the canal for $10 million. And here, this image you see here, this is Theodore Roosevelt, who went down to Panama and who was president during these years. And here he is on a big industrial drudge where they were digging up the land and creating the canal that would connect the two oceans. And so, in sum, we can say that foreign powers played a crucial role in the creation of two Latin American countries. Britain helped to create Uruguay in the 1820s, and the United States helped to create Panama in 1903. And after the midterm exam, we'll examine how foreign influence in Latin America, with the consequences of it, because a central component of nationalism in Latin America in the 20th century is anti-imperialism. It's hostility to foreign influence in the region. So we'll look at that in the coming weeks.